Hello?
Morning.
How are you?
Not bad.
Good.
It's dark.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
The connection program finished.
Oh, okay, good.
I mean, it's I should say like the training phase, and then we go on to well, if the students want to continue, then they go on to flex periods where they start processing like a proper data set,
Yeah.
Doing something at scale that would be, actual, research caliber size.
Right.
Yeah.
So this was through Neurotech X?
No, this is camera.
Okay.
So I forget what camera stands for, but it's something like democratizing MRI in Africa.
All right.
Yes, global magnetic resonance multidisciplinary experts implementing disruptive approaches that are advancing high-value MRI access in Africa.
Okay.
So that's the org, and then Connection is this training program that they run that like is pairing us up with students across Africa, and I think as I said a couple of weeks ago, mine are all in Ghana, or like my team.
Oh.
Yeah, I feel like we should be called Team Ghana.
Yeah.
But they're not in the same city. They're like each is in a different city.
Right.
So we and there's definitely some issues with just internet access and sometimes just even the not video chat, but just the group chat would be an issue.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that they will sign up for the flex part. And other the other big news or the big thing this week was brain modes in Toronto. So brain modes 2025, and I see that like if you go to feel, what is it? One second.
Okay.
Is it Fields Institute? I think is the Yep. So they've got this in terms of they've already got the talks online, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But I know it's a great set of mathematical modelers.
Yeah.
That presented, and so that was and the John Griffiths, the other incoming NeuroTechX board member,
Yeah.
was an organizer for that meeting.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then in France was this Neuro 2025, which was like modeling multimodal MRI. Not so much pushing the kind of like spatial temporal modeling as much as like combining white matter and functional activation maps, combining that analysis
Okay.
in interesting ways, especially as it relates to modeling stroke damage. So how your like resting state connectome changes with stroke damage, which is potentially insightful in terms of just how brains are put together.
Right.
And then in that kind of lesion analysis kind of way,
Right.
Trying to think. Busy here with SF Tech Week, which is just a marketing thing for Andreessen Horowitz. But lots of people doing events this week. So literally thousands of people coming through the building.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Like I've got pictures of people lined up around the block.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll see if that translates into people becoming members.
Right.
But excuse me for I think those my my updates. Some very interesting papers this week in terms of well, I had an interesting discussion. Talked with Emily Sherman. She's the DARPA ARC fellow who led the Inspire program. So Inspire is a very forced acronym. I'm not going to remember it. Let me just. It's investigating how neurological systems process information in reality.
Yeah, that's forced. Let's just say.
That seems like that's a war crime. I'm not sure if forced is strong enough. The point being, what other mechanisms? I mean, I thought it was interesting, right? Like this coincides with I forget what journal. Oh no, I think it's biological cybernetics.
Okay.
To stay on theme for today's meeting. They're doing the 30th, and I think it's the 30th or 40th anniversary of the Terry Sinowski paper on firing rate as, as a neural information processing system.
Yeah.
Right? Which was, in fact, the original conference name. Right?
Yeah.
And Inspire was trying to find other alternative mechanisms, or at least the Inspire ARC opportunity soliciting ideas to explore the question: are there new ways to describe how functional neural systems store and process information that expand beyond the limits of digital representations?
Right.
And which I assume is, that's still, anyway, that was the RFP.
Right.
And it looks like it went out to, certainly some of the usual suspects, but definitely some like cortical labs,
Yeah.
for instance. Did we cover, I know, we talked about the two roads diverged pathways toward harnessing intelligence in neural cell cultures that has these figures. There's another one from the same. Did we talk about the? Hey, one second.
All right.
Yeah. Did we talk about this arXiv paper? One second, sorry. So, in the Brett Kagan's like chief scientist for cortical labs.
Okay.
And they so I think we covered this paper, which is just Brett Kagan by himself, perspective paper, where the big image that's important is this I don't know if it's going to come out in the video, but this like distinguishing organoid culture from what he's going to call bioengineered. It's just not coming through on the.
Well, I remember that figure. I don't. Is it this paper or another paper? I think it's another.
No, it's a different paper.
Right.
I think we talked about this one, which was just talking about these kind of like I loved it because it was going over kind of like the organoid path versus something that could be seen as the 3D bioprinting path.
Right.
And sorry, got an alarm. This one is with so he had a paper at the beginning of the year I mean, I think it was sitting in bioRxiv maybe before that, but he had a paper this year that was like, you know, how to set up your synthetic intelligence lab. And it was like a tutorial paper, but like detailed, you know, like 60 pages plus a supplementary section, you know, with you know, the biological equipment that you need, the reagents that you'd need, the kind of cell culture work, the kind of, you know, every aspect, you know. You know, again, in my opinion, as someone who'd been searching around for this kind of information, it was a absolutely needed, you know, it was filling a hole, right? Where like nobody really had a textbook on this, and you know, cell culture work in general. It is also lacking a lot of that. I mean, in the sense that like it's taught via practicum,
right?
And you know, but it means that setting up your own space is still left as this kind of like, you know, it's transmitted from one generation to the other via the oral tradition or something like that. You know? So that was a nice paper. One of the things that was funny about that paper, or the oddity to me about it, was that it had the kind of people that you'd expect, like Brett Kagan, and a guy on this paper, I'm blanking on his name right now, but like Muhammad
Mostaja Raji or something like that.
Yeah. Who's a brain engineer, right?
Okay.
So he's a UCSC guy, not Kate's PI, but somebody she's worked with for sure. But then there's all these Rochester Institute of Technology people, right? So that was on that's on this original tutorial paper, and they're all on this one too.
Okay.
And it's interesting because it's a NeuroAI paper. I mean, it's definitely like trying to focus on that. And I mean, I can't say I'm very happy with the term NeuroAI.
Right. It's
or, you know,
kind of a buzzword.
They continue. I mean, they're doing what I would consider NeuroAI, but nobody else does.
Right.
And so that just makes the term confusing. But it's interesting because it starts to get into kind of like some of the neuromorphic, like, you know, because they want to talk about how to use biological neural networks, you know, in ML. They start to at least discuss, you know, the history of neuromorphic computing and things like that, which again is like obviously have a, well, not obviously, but at least in implementation have a digital form, right? Even if you're just that. And so again, interesting, like makes a little bit more sense that Guy Wang's group would be involved in that, because when I look him up, he's like a medical imaging researcher.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, I think he's somehow famous in the kind of CT world. Anyway, but I'm sure he has a lot of computational people. So somewhat relevant to Emily Sherman's Inspire program, as well as somewhat interesting for excuse me, somewhat relevant to Josh Bongard's. So he also had another talk this week, the computational philosophy group, this Echolopto group,
Okay.
and you know, so I mean, this is just on the heels of excuse me. Okay. This is on the heels of the foresight meeting with Michael Levin and Josh Bungard.
Okay.
But this computational philosophy group one was very much centered around his polycomputational paper from I think 2023. So this is the
talking about Josh Bongard. Oh yeah, Josh Bongard. Okay.
yeah. It's Josh Bongard. I mean, you know, it's almost like he was definitely going to talk about anthropods. But it's not really his thing. I mean, you know, he seems, certainly if you go through his course, like he's the guy's much more, you know, simulations
Right.
of yeah, you know, soft robotics kind of, and he can relate that to anthropods, but this polycomputation paper is very much in the, well, it's related to some of the papers you've presented on unconventional computing, you know, especially around kind of mechanical processes.
Okay. Yeah.
I can't think of any actual titles right now, but you've definitely talked about some of these.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember which ones they are, but yeah, I remember the polycomputation paper, and that was where they were like programming, almost like programmable matter, kind of in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the ways he was going, and you know, he had, yeah, I mean, so it's maybe if Jess joins later, he can say more, because Jess, when Josh had already started, Jess was like, "Oh, this sounds like he's going the Brainberg vehicle route." and then he totally put up pictures of Brainberg vehicles, and but actually came to overlay metamaterials onto Brainberg vehicles, or that was kind of his contribution, and where the kind of gates that he was creating could be those you know, mechanisms of those early vehicles, right? Anyway, it was an interesting discussion. I was kind of I think I said in the Slack, you know, I was kind of on a deadline for somebody's letter, but what I was interested to see was what what kind of analog computing examples he would bring up, and especially if any of those would be relevant to brain brain modeling.
Yeah.
I mean, almost of the sorts of brain modes, right? Like although they didn't, they're usually doing these kind of decompositions as opposed to like the kind of I really wanted him to try and connect some of his work to like Earl Miller's work, and the kind of people who present at the Wave Club. Do you know that seminar series?
No, I've never heard of it.
It's Wave Club. So you're in luck. Next week, the Wave Club from this week, because it's the first. So traditionally, I think it's like the first Wednesday of the month.
Okay.
Or something like that. What's the 14th? No, it's the first Tuesday. Must be the first Tuesday of the month.
Okay.
And it's Bard Ehrmantraut.
Oh, okay.
Right, is like, right, so you can already get a sense of like, what kind of stuff it's going to be, and it's mostly it definitely has I mean, I don't know if this is what it's set up for, but it's like it's mostly electrophys people who are looking at traveling waves.
Okay.
In brain activity. So it was like Earl Miller, although I mean Earl Miller's definitely spoken there. I feel like the last time Earl Miller spoke, though, it was who's that guy at University of Maryland, like Louis Pessoa? How do you pronounce his name?
Yeah, Luis Pessoa, I guess.
Louis Pessoa, yeah, like the entangled mind, entangled brain, or something.
Yeah.
Right. So he hosted Earl Miller most recently. Like that's why it was on my mind.
Okay.
Or that and specifically it was like Earl Miller was talking about by having a complex spectrum of frequencies active, that you could be doing something that allowed you polycomputation.
Okay.
And it was also how they're setting it up to expand. I mean, if the neuromorphic people, right, are making kind of like leaning on these brain metaphors or inspiration,
yeah,
right, like a lot of the analog computing seems to be kind of like doing the same thing but drawing from quantum computing, that somehow this is a mechanism that will actually allow a lot more parallel computation, right? Which parallel, poly, I mean, and but I never get enough detail, but they never go into the kind of detail that neuromorphic computing people will go into in terms of actually trying to make a simulation or, God forbid, an actual practical implementation, right?
Yeah.
It's more these kind of these nods towards these ideas as opposed to actually like putting together examples of them. And to some degree, the Bongard work was the same thing, but like it was like the magic was the metamaterials.
Yeah.
Where it's like and then metamaterials, and like that'll, like okay, do we have any examples? Any of these, practical, even at a kind of organoid intelligence level,
Right.
Like, I mean, reservoir computing is a thing,
Right.
Like, you can do it with non-living matter, of course. But anyway, along aside, I mean, but relevant to the Emily Sherman stuff, or like that DARPA program. The sad thing is that she's finishing up at like her time at DARPA, and you can't blame anyone for not wanting to be a part of the federal government right now.
Yeah.
So she was probably the best advocate for somebody to be doing organoid intelligence. I mean, she was the art fellow who, was going to be the closest to that. Anyway. But the Giwang, or this latest Brett Kagan paper tries to be tries to kind of gather a lot of the references relative to neuromorphic computing, and the algorithms that have been used by biological intelligence, synthetic intelligence people, so if we hadn't covered it, I just thought that would be a good one to mention as another,
But why don't we go over that paper?
Sure. Yeah, and it's got some good figures like the other one too. Okay. It's still an archive paper, but they're obviously planning to get this out with the same kind of development as these others that they've done, which have been great. I mean, that tutorial paper again is like, absolutely the best reference on the subject.
Yeah, this is the paper, a computational perspective on NeuroAI and synthetic biological intelligence. And the NeuroAI term, of course, is kind of a buzzword. I mean, we're using that as a stand-in for anything that isn't like neural networks, I guess, or, something similar. This is on the arXiv from, I guess, this week. And the authors here, Brett Kagan, Ji Wang, Mohammed Mustajo, Raji, and a couple other people here. So then zoom in here. So
thank you.
they're from Cortical Labs, RPI, Santa Cruz. Yeah, that's where we're talking about. So
most of them, yeah.
Oh yeah. So NeuroAI is an emerging field at the intersection of neuroscience and artificial intelligence, where insights from brain function guide the design of intelligent systems. A central area within this field is synthetic biological intelligence, or SBI. So this is the organoid stuff, which combines the adaptive learning properties of biological neural networks with engineered hardware and software. SBI systems provide a platform for modeling neural computation, developing biohybrid architectures, and enabling new forms of embodied intelligence. And so this is a review where they organize the NeuroAI landscape into 3 interacting domains: hardware, software, and wetware. So this is hardware being silicon hardware, Software being, some programming language or some machine language, and then wetware being the like organoid work and potentially like brain circuits. We outline computational frameworks and highlight recent advances in organoid intelligence, neuromorphic computing, and neurosymbolic learning. These developments collectively point towards a new class of systems that compute through interactions between living neural tissue and digital algorithms. So this is, kind of a nice vision for things. So let's go through the paper. This is kind of selling NeuroAI as a paradigm shift and how this is just kind of the way that we need to go, combining the insights of the brain with artificial intelligence. What that means, of course, is up to the research group that's doing it. So, this is a multidisciplinary effort. It requires people to think, both in terms of biology and in computation. And there are all sorts of applications. They always have to highlight the medical applications, the therapies and other types of cognitive aids and things like that. And they kind of get into, the history of tissue culture, I guess, and then kind of walking through that. Let's see.
It's yeah. I mean, it starts with tissue culture, but it's it's specifically about neurons.
Yeah, they get into the Lancaster papers here, Madeline Lancaster.
Yeah, but like neurons, and then MEAs, and then kind of like how to build, how to start. Do stem cell work, and then organoids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, of course, computational science, they go through kind of some of the history of that and kind of going from the early years of computation to reinforcement learning to deep learning and other types of neuroscientific theories like global workspace theory, integrated information theory, predictive coding, and active inference, and how those can be useful in this context. And then, of course, I talk about neuromorphic hardware driving this kind of spiking event-driven architecture of biological neurons. Okay, so here we examine the emerging field of SBI and NeuroAI with a focus on its computational foundations. We review key technological conceptual advances, algorithms, and architectures that connect biological and artificial forms of intelligence. By highlighting these integrative efforts, we provide a comprehensive framework for understanding the current state and future directions of this rapidly evolving field. So they get into biological neural networks, or BNNs, and this is the foundation of what they want to do. They talk about the complexity of single biological neurons. So ANNs are sometimes described as brain-inspired, but they're extremely simple in terms of their function and operation. It's basically a unit that gives out, spits out weights, and that's not how actual neurons work. How actual neurons work, of course, is much more analog and has a lot of different parameters that you can tune. They get into dendritic trees and dendritic computing. So dendritic trees act not as single summing points, but as distributed filter banks, as shown in Figure 1. Each branch approximates a leaky RC cable with distinct membrane resistance, axial resistance, and capacitance. Synaptic inputs undergo location and time-dependent attenuation, with distant signals arriving more weakly and slowly than proximal ones. So this is a tree here that they show, and they show kind of there's a circuit at each node where they have different electrical parameters, membrane resistance, axial resistance, and capacitance. So you're modeling this physical system within each node, and then you're summing those together but after they've been processed. So this is like a dendrite where you're getting sources from different places, and it's being filtered into the neuron. Okay, so this just shows the dendritic branches here. And it's just underscoring that it's not at all like an artificial neural network. It has the structure that is not really accounted for in our typical networks. Even in something like reinforcement learning, you don't really have this kind of structure. Although in biological reinforcement learning, we kind of assume the structure. Actually, biological reinforcement learning is a lot about dopamine signaling. So, there's a whole different area there. But this is kind of like, there's, of course, the area of dendritic computing, where people are doing a lot of, kind of pioneering work in that area. And they're kind of using the dendrite as the main unit of information processing. Okay, so then there's this key differences between BNNs and ANNs, biological and artificial neural networks. So their focus here is on the properties for each one. They focus on training data requirements. So in BNNs, we have evolutionary pre-training, innate threat detection, and feature extraction. So that's the way they kind of state that. So in other words, like you have things that are innate or encoded in, for different animals, like if you have a fight or flight response, that's evolutionary pre-training. Innate threat detection and feature extraction are things also that are innate, that are kind of analogous to pre-training in an artificial neural network. And then, of course, you have large data sets in artificial neural networks. One thing they didn't point to here is that biological neural networks don't require a lot of quote-unquote training, where the training, rather, is not, you don't have to learn, you don't have to be exposed to the environment as much as possible to learn things. I mean, you get exposed in development to things. We've talked about that before, where development is about being exposed to a lot of things, but also like being focused on different things and playing with them and seeing how they behave. So it's a very different type of training than like what you get in artificial neural networks. So there's that difference too, but I'll put that aside for now. The second property is energy efficiency. So biological neural networks operate on a few watts of glucose, and artificial neural networks have high computational resource consumption. So this is like where we have our huge data centers that require a lot of energy versus like a human brain that requires basically food and water, and then that's enough energy to produce what the brain does. Then the third point is intra-network communication. So this is where we have the focus on synapses, complex biochemical interactions at synapses. You get all sorts of signaling at synapses, as opposed to artificial neural networks where we have simple mathematical operations such as addition and convolution. So, in the biological brain, you have these, biochemical signals, you have binding to receptors, things like that. In ANNs, and then you can maybe characterize those as mathematical operations. In artificial neural networks, they're basically, the operations are the entire sort of interaction between neurons. So it's all it's all kind of condensed into addition or convolution or multiplication or something like that. The learning mechanisms. In biological neural networks, we have self-organization, synaptic plasticity, and predictive coding. In artificial neural networks, we have gradient-based backpropagation. So that's one. This is kind of the example to use from artificial neural networks. The idea being is that artificial neural networks are optimized. They follow a gradient to learn things. In biological neural networks, basically learning is, I don't know if there's a gradient, People often refer to learning gradients, but they're kind of informal structures, and really the focus is on like synaptic plasticity, the predictive nature of the brain, and then self-organization of networks. So it's a very different sort of paradigm there. And so then the next one is systems architecture. So that's biological neurons with integrated storage and computation. And then in artificial neural networks, we have silicon-based transistors, von Neumann architectures, which separate memory and processing into two components. Whereas in biological networks, those things aren't necessarily separated, or if they are, they're in a network that interacts with each other. So it's a very different architecture. Emergent properties is the next property, and this is where we have in biological neural networks spontaneous oscillations, criticality, wave propagation, and homeostatic balance. And then in artificial neural networks, hierarchical feature representations and attractor dynamics. Okay, and then the last one is resilience to damage, which is in biological neural networks, dynamic rewiring and homeostatic plasticity, allowing for partial recovery. So this is where if you have damage to the system, how does it get fixed or recovered? And of course, this is something that the brain is well known for in terms of plasticity, but we have this sort of, we're interested in how the network rewires itself. So this is famous functional biological neural networks. And then in artificial neural networks, we have static redundancy, things like dropout, and limited on the fly recovery. So, yeah, I would also add in terms of resilience to damage that there's also redundancy in the biological neural network. And, that also plays a role in recovering information. But there, and then there are connections between these, like, emergent properties. This area is really interesting, but it speaks to a lot of the other areas as well. And so I like this table, but you could probably keep revising it in terms of different properties and differences that you can think of. But I think the take-home message here is that biological neural networks do things a lot differently than artificial neural networks. And we can learn a lot from biological neural networks in a way that kind of gives us different paradigms of artificial neural networks, at least in terms of that. They're sort of, even if we had something like an organoid culture or an organoid intelligence, that it's artificial in the sense that it's been sort of cultured and curated by human experimenters, but it's still artificial in the sense that it's doing some, it's not like the actual biological system, but it looks very different from the artificial neural networks we use today.
I liked that, it's I'm just seeing that in emergent properties, we've got Beggs, 2008, 2022, and this is the Indiana professor who replicated the mind in vitro, right? So the UIZUC Open Microelectrode Array project, his postdoc is the one that, like, they end the paper with, like, a postdoc was able to build our system in 15 hours and, get his own thing running in Indiana. And it's Beggs.
Right.
So just like that.
Yeah. He's done this stuff with like brain criticality for years, like, thinking about how that happened. Yeah. Thinking about how that happened.
Absolutely.
So I would, emergent properties, I might add, like, it's kind of the brain or neural complexity or brain complexity. So, we have all sorts of interesting properties of oscillations and coupled oscillators and things like that. And that provides like these very complex dynamics that we don't see in artificial neural networks at all. I mean, sometimes the dynamics are sort of the information processing, but it's like kind of yeah, that's not going to be captured in an artificial neural network. Um, so yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can come back to this table too. I mean, I think we should collect all these figures and tables, and yeah. Okay, so
for sure.
and I know exactly what week that was that we talked about that other paper with the figure that you showed. It was when we were talking about bioprinting and yeah. So I'll go back to that.
Yeah. And he's gonna have a little bit on that too, but yeah.
Okay. So yeah, then the properties of functional biological neural networks. So, we're thinking about what are the key features that we need for functional learning capable biological neural networks. Thinking back to like if we were going to um, sort of extract some design principles out of the brain, how do we do that? So, the first is neuronal diversity. And that is brain function relies on the interplay between diverse neuron types, including excitatory pyramidal cells and inhibitory interneurons, which regulate network dynamics and plasticity. And so that's, again, where in artificial neural networks you have one unit type, and we usually don't have different types of neurons because we don't deal with like things like, different types of ion channels being expressed in the neurons or different types of neural morphologies. We just have the unit, and then the unit has connections with other units, and then they're governed by weights, and that's it. So that's one design principle. The next is modular and hierarchical organization. So, there's this idea that neural circuits are organized hierarchically to produce sensory motor information and execute complex behaviors. Engineered biological neural networks do not fully replicate this architecture. If you look at assembloid or connectoid approaches, they aim to capture key aspects of modular connectivity, but they don't quite get to the level of a mature neural circuit or a mature maybe neuronal network, which of course may be many circuits combined into one functional unit. So if you're thinking about like a network for learning and memory, or a network for attention, or a network for just doing something like addition or mathematical computations, you may need to have different tissues or different brain regions that are hierarchically connected. So in your typical assembloid, you have a bunch of cell types smushed together, and then they form kind of this functional segregation. But the organization, of course, is not going to be the same as you see in a biological neural network, or a mature one in any case. So this is, again, end of a reach goal at this point, but this is like the one big difference between BNNs and ANNs. The next design principle is long range communication and critical dynamics. So that's where we have these oscillations like gamma, theta, and beta, and these frequency bands support interregional coordination of memory, attention, and motor control. And then if you're thinking about the dynamics of them, you're thinking about criticality in the brain, balancing stability and adaptability. So there are all these like meta meta features of the brain, different phenomena that are kind of beyond sort of the single cell or even the population analysis. It's things in the dynamics that we would like to capture for a network, such as what we're trying to do with biological inspiration. Then our final design principle is parallel distributed computation. And of course, there's this sort of area of ANN research that was big in the 80s and 90s, parallel distributed processing, and that's, kind of discovering like parallelism in computation and in, in computational neuroscience and that. But this is actually kind of thinking about how the brain really takes advantage of this design principle. So the brain's billions of neurons and trillions of synapses support massively parallel processing. We're talking about at that scale. So we're talking about a massive scale and being able to build systems that operate at that scale, but also being able to control systems that operate at that scale. While modern computer architecture such as graphical processing units or GPUs enable parallelization in artificial neural networks, biological neural networks are still far exceed them in connectivity and energy efficiency. So there's this connection between, or at least this thinking that the parallel nature of biological neural networks, the distributed nature of biological neural networks, allow them to achieve these gains that are so far elusive to artificial neural networks. So, energy efficiency being a primary example, but also connectivity and sort of, we talk about these things, it's sort of like magical. It's like, how does the brain do so much with so little energy? Or, there must be some added stuff in the connectivity or something. And we're trying to find, like, what those things are so we can implement them in some sort of model or device. And so that's what they're getting at with these design principles. And again, there are probably other design principles, but these are the ones they're identifying. Then they're mapping out this NeuroAI spectrum next. Just thinking about all the things going on in the field. This is an interdisciplinary landscape. We have these three domains: hardware, software, and wetware. And, hardware, of course, are things like neuromorphic chips or spike-based silicon systems. The software are computational models inspired by brain function. Those could be neurosymbolic AI or reinforcement learning. And then wetware are these living biological neural systems like organoids, cultures, or brain slices. And so you combine these into these domains. So they also do this categorization of neural AI fields, and they categorize SBI or SBI-related neural AI into two broad classes. The first is that fields that do not involve living neuronal cells. These are sort of, the sort of hardware implementations of these kind of biologically inspired systems. So these areas leverage the morphology, physiology, and computational principles of biological neural networks to develop brain-inspired hardware and algorithms. Okay, so this is actually figure 2, a graph representation of the different fields. We'll get into that in a minute. But let's continue with this point 1. And so that the point 1 splits between neuromorphic computing and neuro-inspired learning. So neuromorphic computing is a hardware implementation that moves us away from von Neumann architectures towards things that are more biologically inspired. So von Neumann architecture, of course, separates out memory and processing for very practical reasons, but that's not really maybe the way we want to build devices that are inspired by the brain, because that's not really the way the brain works. And so you can build these neuromorphic devices that are much different than the von Neumann architecture. And then neuro-inspired learning, which is where we have different types of algorithms and software that are inspired by the brain. They're not at all like the kinds of algorithms that we have for von Neumann architectures. If you know anything about how to, the different types of algorithmic challenges we have for, like parallel computing and for quantum computing, that like the algorithms for those paradigms look very different than sort of the serial von Neumann architecture algorithms that we may learn in like our computer science classes or something like that. So if we have like we have a certain a search algorithm that we build for a serial von Neumann architecture. if we want to parallelize that, it's going to look different. And if we put that on a quantum computer, it looks different still. So there are a lot of these neuro-inspired algorithmic opportunities to build new algorithms, build new sort of computational tools. So the second part of this categorization, so there was fields that do not involve living neural cells, and then two are fields that involve living neural cells. So this is where we want to kind of leverage the efficiency and adaptability of brain neural networks and integrate biological neurons with digital systems. So this, of course, is organoid intelligence and bioengineered intelligence. And so this is where you're using organoids or some sort of culture, cell culture, to build these systems that can process information and do this in a way that's similar to what in vivo nervous system does. So sometimes people are using brain slices for this, but other times they're using neural cultures. These BNNs can be integrated with computers to develop effective brain-computer interface systems. So those are the distinctions there.
Yeah, no, just this is my issue with BCI as a term. I mean, it is interesting, right? The Mind in Vitro group has another section on, they first and foremost talk about culturing neurons, right? And again, like, okay, so the easiest thing to do is 2D. The organoids became this new platform because the neurons would self-assemble. I mean, with certain cues, and that added this whole new layer of complexity. Slicing of, taking a brain slice, and trying to keep it alive is definitely another alternative. There's a longer discussion that relates to some organoid intelligence and brain-computer interfaces. This is not getting us any closer to either putting organoids into brains or decoding. This isn't decoding a living brain either.
Right.
But these are my issues that I need to work through.
Yeah.
But I love this graph.
Yeah. So this is figure 2. Yeah.
This is cool, and I'd never thought about representing it this way, but it really it captures well the complex relationships.
Yeah, so this is where we have synthetic biology, cell and tissue engineering, neuroscience, computational biology, and so these are all the fields that kind of go into this enterprise.
Yeah.
And then all the kind of the tools that we have here, neural tissue culture, computational modeling, cognitive and systems neuroscience, machine learning, and then the next level are these kind of different approaches: neural tissue modeling, neuromorphic computing. Then you also have reservoir computing and feedback driven learning, and then synthetic biological intelligence and neurodigital twin model, and then NeuroAI.
There's a lot of acronyms to learn here.
Yeah, they're
trying to define them for us. But as you go down, they start using their new acronyms.
Yeah, where did that come from?
To make additional acronyms. Okay.
All right. So let's kind of move down the paper. So they kind of talk about the hardware. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just to, like like again, my only real issue with this paper is that this isn't what NeuroAI means to most people.
Yeah, it's very cultivated for their own.
It's very I can see why Brett Kagan thinks that this is what NeuroAI means.
Yeah.
But when you see all the other NeuroAI papers or like discussion or the what's the Montreal AI, well that is AI in neuroscience. I don't know. You look at the Patrick Minot NeuroAI for AI safety paper, and honestly, Patrick's probably the most biological of them. But
Yeah.
in general, they're more just brain inspired AI. It's like thinking about transformers as the hippocampus or something like that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely they kind of cultivate this for their own purposes here. But
Yeah.
this is
Again, this is my issue. I'm jealous of all this work.
oh yeah, well, it's
It's
great
awesome.
work. Yeah, this is an
Right.
illustration of a neuromorphic architecture. So this just kind of shows how this is organized without kind of it's very different, underscoring how it's very different from ANNs that we use today. Then they have this idea of off-chip and on-chip learning. This is deep in the weeds of neuromorphic architectures. Then we have, of course, neuro-inspired learning, which are the software models. And then this is where we have neurosymbolic AI and agentic AI. So this difference between sort of a neurosymbolic approach where you take symbolic reasoning and combine it with subsymbolic learning, which is what we use in deep learning or other types of computer vision. But then we also add symbolic reasoning on top of that. And so the idea is you can build structured knowledge, and it's basically combining the best of both worlds in terms of like GoFi versus like the more recent Norwegian approach to AI, which is data driven. Um, and then kind of talking about neurosymbolic AI and some of the ways people do that. This just shows neurosymbolic AI as kind of a model. And then let's see, they get into the let's see. They were talking about yeah, they were talking about agentic AI. And agentic AI, I don't really talk about that a lot. They talk about it here kind of at the end. Neurosymbolic agents can be made to autonomously interact with their environment, update their internal knowledge representations, and adapt rules through active learning mechanisms. And so this is where they bring up active inference as being kind of the way in which agents behave, and kind of don't talk about it very much. But then they get into reinforcement.
We're talk more about it.
Yeah. So then they get into reinforcement learning and active inference, where they kind of go through reinforcement learning and how that works, and then kind of contrasting that with reinforcement learning and active inference as sort of different ways to do this. Although, there are sort of ways that you can combine them as well. It's just that active inference is really about sort of it's where you're using this measure of surprise, and you're using that to minimize, you're basically minimizing surprise, and that gives you your kind of optimal sort of behavior or your adaptive behavior. You were going to say something?
Well, just to that point, right? Like the I mean, one, it should be said that Brett Kagan has papers with Carl Friston.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
and so it's just like they're trying to make it sound like active inference is really adding this brand new thing, and that reinforcement learning needs to have this exploration kind of shoehorned in or something. Like I forget the way they put it. bolted on or something like that. Like, you know, um, I'm not seeing it exactly, but it's this paragraph right before active inference. Anyway, but like, you know, they Ryan Smith does the tutorial, like I forget what his paper is called, but it's like tutorial on active inference. You know, I mean, like, he's a total active inference guy, right?
Yeah.
Like, and next week there's the, what's it called? International Active Inference.
Yeah, IWAI.
Workshop.
Yeah.
Is that
yeah, it's the workshop on
anyway,
active inference.
And like Ryan Smith is like keynote, you know, doing his tutorial thing. And, you know, he's the one who's just like, you know, active inference becomes reinforcement learning. like,
right.
Like, you know, it in many cases, that like it collapses to reinforcement learning. Like, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean,
Again.
Yeah, there are a lot of parallels. Yeah, you get the
yeah, and I love their figures.
yeah,
or, you know, like so it's fine. I mean, you know, like again, like they're definitely trying to get at like how the active inference model, as described here, is adding something.
right, and it's kind of. I mean, I wouldn't contrast them, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's because reinforcement learning, you're trying to sort of, it isn't just about like policies and selecting policies. It's really about the sort of adaptive behavior. You're trying to find the optimal policy. In active inference, you're trying to minimize the surprise, and you have this, you do have this sort of joint distribution that you're trying to, you know, understand. Yeah. So that's, but they're both kind of very similar, and the structure is very similar in that respect. I'm gonna when we do our presentations to the active inference symposium, I've kind of been summarizing what we've been doing with open source sustainability, and that's one of the themes that we have is that we have this sort. We've done a lot of work on reinforcement learning. We've done some work in active inference, and there's this kind of common theme there. It's emerging, which is that you're kind of using these models to get at some very deep kind of social coordination problems, and how do they kind of get at that in the same way, where what is the structure of these social coordination problems? It's really interesting. We'll have to go over it maybe next week or week after. But yeah, it's definitely, if you think about like what they're trying to achieve, they're basically converging on the same thing.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see. It'd be interesting to expand the current project with a more active inference model.
Yeah, well, Brian McCorkle was doing that, and he did like it was like social active inference. And we think of active inference as being in a brain, but you could do it easily with 8 different agents, multi-agent kind of active inference, and that's kind of a whole nother can of worms. But yeah, we should develop that more. I'm not sure who at the Active Inference Institute. I think that would probably be a good place to go for people to see if people are interested in working on problems like that, working that out more.
Yeah, and well, and the other as well as like putting something in the I forget what Daniel Friedman has. He has a particular name for it, but you can definitely advertise projects
Oh yeah, yeah.
with his yeah. He just did that quarterly roundtable.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Where he talked about a lot of the opportunities to get involved or propose things.
Yeah, so definitely, yeah, we should keep that in mind. So yeah, let's finish this paper up. So we have a diagram for reinforcement learning. We have a diagram for active inference over two time steps. And then, we're kind of getting into this table with the differences between reinforcement learning and active inference, just like for different aspects. Um, you know, I don't know if that's necessarily like key to understanding the other part of the paper, which is like we have all these different neural AI architectures because there are other options besides reinforcement learning and active inference. Like, those are two methods. There may be other methods that you could employ here, like or imply that or that you could apply that would be relevant as well. So this is kind of like two. I guess you could say that reinforcement learning and active inference are based on neural activity, but it's a little bit shady to say that. But anyways, yeah, I mean I kind of see why they're getting at they're taking this kind of route, but anyways, so this and then they get into open loop and closed loop learning, which is like where you have this contrast between reservoir computing and feedback based learning. So reservoir computing, of course, is where you have this high dimensional dynamical system. You have these nodes in a container, and they kind of find their own wiring through this sort of different this readout layer that maps neural activity to desired outputs. So basically trains the network in a different way than what we see in typical neural networks. And reservoir computing is very hot right now. People are able to do different types of computational things like pattern recognition, line source separation, and time series predictions. These are problems that are kind of interesting to as kind of benchmarks, not necessarily for like being like doing things like the brain does them, but that's reservoir systems are often assumed to have fixed weights. Biological neurons exhibit synaptic plasticity and may self-organize based on input-driven plastic changes. So these are all kind of this is one approach, reservoir computing, and then the other approach is feedback-based learning, which is where you have closed loop systems that continuously adapt neural activity through real time feedback. External stimulation is used to reinforce or inhibit specific network patterns. So just having that contrast between reservoir computing and feedback based learning. And then, of course, the modular architectures, getting into assembloids and connectoids. So the assembloids are where you have different types of tissues kind of in the same culture. Connectoids, I imagine, are things that like building connectomes in a in culture. They have so many terms for that. It's like they have so many terms for different types of organoid. Um, yeah, so like they define it here. Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, just like yeah, it makes more sense for I get why the assembloid people are doing assembloids,
Yeah.
right? Because they care about brain science.
Yeah.
Right? Describing assembloids and connectoids as if they're what's this term? Modular architectures?
Yeah.
Like modular biological neural network architectures? Like
Yeah, it's not really the same thing.
no. It's like yeah, and you know, what happened to like, I mean, again, like, I'm not necessarily saying they should push this, but like, what about who's the palm Jeff
Yeah,
Hawkins,
Jeff Hawkins.
like
Right.
Thousand Brains.
Yeah, hierarchical temporal modeling. Yeah.
Yeah, like I mean,
yeah, I know they kind of
it
ignore
doesn't
that.
come up once in this whole thing. it's it's a review of things. I mean, like, do they have a beef or something?
I don't know. Yeah, it's like that's.
But just in terms of the cortical column,
right, right. That would be a logical thing to organizational principle, right?
Bring up a cortical column once.
Yeah, I know.
Doesn't that seem like a glaring omission?
It does seem like they're cherry picked for like kind of going in a certain direction.
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, and this idea of like I mean, as well as like, this isn't even cherry picking, like connectoids versus assembloids, and it has to do with with the engineering, like using, what is it? I mean, I've never seen the term connectoids.
Yeah, that's a new one.
I've seen assembloids that are using microchannel links instead of fusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. They define assembloids as fused organoids. So region-specific organoids are grown separately and then physically fused together. This is where you get these different.
Yeah. I'm still not exactly sure that's how like Pasca's group or Noblich's group.
Yeah. The idea is that you have like these different tissues that are going to form, and then you have migration, circuit formation, and interregional signaling. Right. So you're just basically putting together a brain from like Frankenstein's monster brain or something.
Right. I mean, but when Pasca's doing it, right, or Noblish is doing it, they're like doing a subcortical organoid, a cortical organoid, a cortical organoid that represents, I mean, a subcortical organoid that represents this thing, like that, where now I've put together, this limbic circuit because I want to do a Parkinson's like model or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, like again, like I'm not sure why I'm picking on them.
Yeah, I know.
But there is some, like it's an arXiv paper. It's obviously not done. But it does strike me as a little bit like the because he was on these papers too. The organoid intelligence paper that had Thomas Harding and Lena Smirnova kind of did this same kind of thing. Like it was trying really hard to like be defining a new field.
Right.
Right.
Trying too hard.
Like we gotta define our terms.
Yeah. So when they say connectoids, they mean microchannel-linked organoids. That means that the individual organoids are maintained in separate microfluidic chambers and then connected through microchannels, so they're not really physically together. They're in this set of flow chambers where you have basically, you can control the growth of each, but they have access to one another. So it's really kind of a limited physiological relevance, but allows you to control the system more directly. And so that's just kind of the difference. And again, these are like different, different methods, basically, And you'd never see that in a real brain, so it's like I don't know if there's necessarily a point to this distinction.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So I think that's enough for that paper. But that's a great paper. Thank you, Morgan, for bringing it up and having a discussion around that.
Yeah, they've got great. I mean, I think some of their figures are really helpful, and um, yeah,
yeah.
like as much as I am picking on some of their terminology, their organization of the kind of multidisciplinary nature of the work is really helpful and I think informative.
Yeah.
And it's very much from a couple people that are like intimately involved in this, right?
Right.
So we can dig around and find what the beef is with them and Hawkins.
Okay.
But there is some more stuff that just goes on that's like super relevant for the dish brain kind of work.
Yeah.
And the not I mean the kind of the standard formats and stuff like that. That's stuff that they've brought up before, try to make it look more like a field, but there is a nice section on the recent advances and application, section 10, that's nice because they go over basically everybody that we've talked about, Final Spark, Brain Engineers, Indiana, UIUC, Mind in Vitro, and a few others that is cool to be looking up,
Yeah.
and then and then some like just like their tutorial paper, they've got a great supplementary section. So I'm hoping that this will be, like this will come out next year and it'll be like twice as big, and really being kind of like the defining, is like what I'll be pointing students at.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
It's cool.
So why don't we move on here? Jesse, how are you?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm okay. I've been busy. I've been sick. I've been dealing with stuff. So apologies for being a little bit not here as usual. But I'm all right. I'm pushing some things forward, and I have some opportunities that I'm waiting to hear back from about certain things. I kind of missed some of the start of today's meeting, and I know you put some papers on ResearchGate and stuff too, or like updated some things.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. I have to go back, and I'm sure you talked about that. I think you said last week or something. So I've yet to fully get into that, but it's something I'm going to try to do very soon.
Okay.
In terms of some general news and things like that, I guess it's quote unquote Boston Longevity Week starts next week, and I'll be doing some things with that, including a hackathon of sorts, where I will be a mentor, judge type person, and it's cool because it's gonna have it'll be based here in Boston at MIT, and should have, I don't know if Levin himself will be there, but someone from Levin's lab, and a number of other folks in kind of the community Ecoloptus stuff. We have Elon and Will. I don't know if they're going to be directly part of it or not, but Andres from the Quality Research Institute is sort of, this is going to be a different kind of a hackathon. They're very much trying to push. They're trying to really be rigorous, but also like, kind of address some of the different kind of spaces that they want to do, and that's all interesting. But I'm also interested in it because of I think there's a little bit of some good emphasis on trying to do some synthetic time at the end of the hackathon, and that's what I wrote about in the Slack. It's sort of basically, I've talked for a long time about like doing research differently, sort of hashtag banner of that, and I'm thinking a lot about how to run events or conferences or academic happenings to incorporate more of that. I've had a conversation yesterday specifically about the concept of a hackathon and sort of what alternatives or what, thinking a little bit about, and this is separate from the event or even about Boston Longevity Week, but it's like something that's particularly in my mind yesterday into today is hackathons are very good for doing very specific things. And then you have sort of like the classic quote of, like, I think it was Steve Jobs or somebody in the Apple camp saying like, "Oh, I hate consultants because you don't stay with what you're developing for a longer period of time. And, you just sort of do the thing. You don't stay with it, or you add a commentary and you're not attached to its results." And so I've been thinking like, what is this alternate, or what are alternates? And then that's a whole other thing that I've been doing with the Future Center. But what in terms of a hackathon, like what are its strengths and weaknesses, and what are its blind spots, and what are ways that you could potentially create other events around that, or augment things so that the inherent properties of what you're trying to do or build might be different. So that's sort of a the last point is like the most tangential of everything. But suffice to say, it's going to be a very busy 2 weeks ahead. It's been a very slow week or two for me otherwise. So I'm kind of the calm before the storm right now, but even that's fading away as things pick up. So that's a very light overview, but any questions or comments so far?
No, it sounds good though. I mean, you got a lot of stuff going on, and yeah, I did cover, some things are kind of coming out now. So the last, I gave an update, I think a week ago on the YouTube channel, and you can see more about some of those things on that in that report. So, it's a couple things coming out on ResearchGate as preprints that we've been kind of sitting on, and so take a look at that. So yeah, and then we have, of course, our active inference symposium coming up in November. That's going to have some materials coming out of that. And then, we have kind of the end of the year after that. And so I don't know what people want to, kind of think about for, the upcoming year. I mean, I know it's only October of 25, but, it's good to kind of think about, the next 6 months or the next year, about what people want to do, what people want to accomplish. So.
Yeah, for sure. there's some carryover. Like I'm happy because some of the data interaction stuff has basically carried over from the spring into fall. And we'll see just how much it does though. But that's been nice to kind of see. And I should probably do a more formal, like, where are we with that? But as far as like orthogonal proper and things to do, I guess an interesting development is that Avery has been doing some playing around with some AI stuff. Is a very generic way of saying it, but I feel like there's a lot of things. I think one of the latent things, and I think I've said this before, but I think one of the latent things that is sort of just waiting for us to do more in the lab in general is sort of this either not necessarily multi-actor, but that's sort of inherent to it, but things around either metabrain, personality, allostatic kinds, the types, and this like simulation and or like so things in that space. And an interesting overlap, or kind of overlap, and I'm still somewhat. I just saw the full like kind of release of earlier today, but Dunya from the augmentation lab and MIT stuff is releasing her work, which she's been working on, which has been, I guess, NeuroChat, the world's first neuroadaptive chatbot that adapts and responses to your cognitive engagement. So I guess it's looking at things like attention, curiosity, focus, and tailoring teaching style to that. And I just saw this here, and it was put in another Discord thing. But like, I'm not really suggesting that is what we focus on, but also literally yesterday, someone showed me a job posting from Google about mental health, and how Google wants a mental health like specialist, and you know, there's a very interesting space between all the sort of one, how do you say, the nuts and bolts of how you're doing things, and then sort of this commentary on, well, we're gonna, how are you doing it? That if you want to say the ethics piece, the responsible AI piece, but even more so, just sort of, I don't know. We were reviewing the job description, and we were a bit cynical about like, you know, to what end, and is it sort of like the ethics board approach to Google, where we want you to say certain things and do certain things, but you know, it's kind of just almost like a you know, not quite plausible deniability, but plausible giving your care enough to well, we have our mental health specialists that are, but what's interesting, as another slight tangent, is a bit like, you know, there's a sort of an unabashed we're all making products for young impressionable people, and we're going to do a good job of it, but we're in this is our business, and just seeing that stance emerge and change over time too. So I think I'm a very soft, easy pitch right now, and I don't think we should do this per se, but I think there's something in a space like you could have sort of. I'd be very content with just doing, frankly, a computational simulation focus on the topics that we're talking about. But you could easily dovetail like a society ethics technology type component onto it too. So I don't know, like I don't know how much, um, but that's one thing that immediately comes to my mind. And secondly, having been a little bit more exposed to some like Josh Bongard and the Michael Levin stuff and the living things are not machines, and of course like the behavior purpose teleology, cybernetic stuff, and then obviously the paper, like one of the things that um, Bradley sort of I don't know, released or drawn attention to or put together again. Like I think like 2, 3, 4 years ago, reimagining cybernetics was kind of this. Oh yeah, we might be returning to this stuff now. I think a lot of people are doing that now. Like I think it's become a bit popular in certain circles, but like some of the folks are using cybernetics in a less haha you know like more intentionally trying to use things from like old school cybernetics. And again, it's certainly not everywhere, but I think there's something there. And even from if you're Avery old school allostatic kinds work to meta brain stuff, I think there's a lot of things in those spaces that would be ripe, and could even draw like meaningful projects and also some like meaningful interns who want to work on them. Like I'm pretty sure I could find some folks who want to do things in those spaces in general, and research assistants and all that stuff too. Those two immediately jump out at me. I know you weren't even asking for that, but like it kind of just those are very already on my mind topics, and I'm curious what you think about where would you want things to go next year?
Well, I mean, there are a couple areas I think we can probably, revisit or bolster. So, like, obviously the cybernetic stuff, there's some momentum there. We should keep going with that. I think with the agents, the open source sustainability stuff, like what I was talking about with the different connections between reinforcement learning and active inference, and some of the things we've been talking about there, not just thinking about it in terms of like a highly applied sort of approach, but like what is the deep, kind of theoretical questions that kind of link together these different approaches. And then, of course, we can use that insight for some of the agent stuff and revisit some of that work because we've, kind of, if you look at what we've been putting out in the embodied intelligence workshop proceedings, we've kind of put together a couple of years worth of different papers there. And they've kind of laid out this story of like developmental Bradenberg vehicles. And then, of course, what are the things that lead from that work? What are the things that lead from some of the other work with metabrains? How can we pull that together more? And so there's a lot of stuff there ready to go. It's just a matter of kind of thinking about how to maybe not just write the next paper, but what are the paths forward in terms of interesting research, interesting approaches, things like that.
Yeah, and I find that to be as a exactly, and I find that to be where yes, but I won't. I don't think I'm avoiding dragging us in a very particular direction because I do think that's exactly the kind of things that are important right now on many fronts, and it would be good in this specific instance. Yes, for what we're doing, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Hmm. There are things going on with the Future Center that I'm slowly. I don't know. I don't know what to call the stage that it's in. It's in a kind of a launching. Like there are things happening and they're like semi-public.
Right.
but it feels like the ship has set sail and it's kind of just it's going slowly. Um, but that's just fine. Like it's not ready. It's not ready for anything else. I'll just say very briefly. I don't know if I put an email out soon. I meant to send emails a few weeks ago and things like that, but it didn't. It's okay that it was this way. But in the email, was a very, I kind of, I tucked it in there, and it was a very very loose, future center like preview about what we're doing in alternatives, a video, and it's I'm okay with it mostly. Like I would give it a B, B minus, and that's okay. Like I'm trying to do some of the iterative stuff between both doing writing more and then like presenting to people that have no idea what it is that I'm talking about. I'm trying to do, but essentially, there's movement on this framework about like we these terms like alternatives or on ramps or destinations or directions or and what do these things mean? So I'm kind of developing some of the core fundamental terms and particularly in terms of thinking about alternatives as like a thing to pursue, uh, a more rigorous literature review across like actual interdisciplinary research, some meta science stuff, and different like domains in terms of like governance or like the structure, like philosophy, but also like administratively or structurally how you're going to do some of these things. So that's partly why I'm excited about I've happened into this opportunity where the event I talked about first that's happening this coming Friday will be an opportunity to basically, and I just talked to the organizer and basically by green light to make it like a case study of, okay, like how can there be this intentional synthesis time at the end of the event? And I'm trying to find, I don't know if there's really a way to do much quote unquote rigor about making it a case study right now because the timing of everything it's a hackathon, right? But at least documenting it, and working with people that sort of try, here's what we're doing, in this space, and we're being intentional about it, and we're gonna try to basically make it a reasonable test run of that. Like that's exciting to me, and this is something that we've been talking about here for a long time, and it's sort of the first live action opportunity to do it. So we don't have to talk about that today, but I am very curious if you all have thoughts about that over the week, because I wouldn't mind like some perspective on what to do in that situation. So maybe in Slack we can talk about that. But yeah, I'll leave it at that as sort of like some broad, slightly indirect but broad updates about adjacent things that are going on here.
Yeah, I think that's great. And so yeah, let's kind of keep on some of these things and keep working on them and yeah, and as we go along, I think we're gonna maybe start to get some more movement on some of these areas that have been quiet for a while. Hopefully, yeah. So thank you, Jesse, for the update. So I'm gonna finish up here talking about actually something that I saw online. This is a AI Journal Club. This is kind of an interesting group here. This is the Sensorimotor AI Journal Club. This is being held at Berkeley, but I think it's a good example of kind of what Jesse was talking about in terms of finishing up an event with synthesis. This is, this is a certain style of it, right? So this is the reinforcement learning debate series. And so this is how can we build and understand agents that learn through action? And so what they have is basically 5 people all taking very intentional adversarial approaches. Um, so first is Ellie Sinesh, who's going to argue abolish the value function in reinforcement learning, try active inference instead, and envisions the brain as a probabilistic feedback controller. And then that's on October 2nd, and then October 23rd, there's going to be Niels Ledholm, who says you have 1,000 brains in your brain, which is this actually the hierarchical temporal modeling approach. Structured representations for the win. The cortical column is a sensorimotor learning system. Okay, so there's the sort of the active inference approach, the HTM approach, and then the third person on November 6th is Adam Lowett. I literally measured value in the brain. So this is pro reinforcement learning, and specifically in opposition to Ellie Sinesh's position, which is to abolishing the value function, and Adam's position is long live the value function. And he would further argue that reward is enough. So that's the RL camp, the reinforcement learning camp. And then Ann Collins on November 13th is not everything is reinforcement learning. So her argument is beyond reward maximization and thinking about the brain as a symphony, not a single reinforcement learning machine. So you have kind of 4 perspectives there, and then the 5th perspective on December 11th is Thomas Ringstrom, no reward for you. That's his tagline. And then, but yes to empowerment and compositional policies. So you see these different perspectives. Actually, we've been just talking about this in this meeting, where you have these different kind of takes on how the brain does things, computations, whatever you want to call it, and how we can use formal models. And those models kind of sit in opposition sometimes. But what they're going to do in this series after these 5 talks is then on January 22nd in 2026, they're going to have a final debate and synthesis. So they're going to have, this is kind of a debate approach. It's kind of, each week you're going to have a different perspective. And then you're going to have this final debate where they're kind of all there and they're kind of putting together things into a synthesis. So that's an interesting series. I just think that was interesting because it's kind of combining a lot of perspectives into a very interesting kind of way of doing, of kind of reaching this synthesis, this theoretical synthesis. So this is the RL debate series. Their website, sensorimotorai.github.io, and this is their debates. And so, their kind of idea, of course, is to focus on sensorimotor learning. And they ask the question, why do we have brains? And the answer is simple: to survive and reproduce. And neither is possible without some action. And so therefore brains are for generating behavior. And so then, that means that to understand intelligence, we have to understand action. Okay? So how do we formalize active learning, which is kind of how action is sustained? And so then, of course, the mainstream approach is reinforcement learning, which posits that agents act to maximize rewards. This is the figure from Sutton and Bartow, which summarizes reinforcement learning. You have the agent, conducting an action in an environment. That action then has a state and results in a state and a reward. The state is returned to the agent. So if the agent does something, there's a corresponding state. There's also a corresponding reward or lack of reward. So if the agent does something, it generates a state. It also generates a reward, and then that state can either be reinforced or the agent finds a different state. And so that's the idea. And then the policies are sort of how do you reach a certain state, and what is the best way to do that? How's the best way to act? So at each time step, the agent produces action AT, causing the environment state to evolve from state T to state T plus 1. The environment in return provides the agent with a scalar reward, RT plus 1. That's the standard textbook view. So, I mean, there are a lot of ways you can unpack this. There are a lot of ways to think about this model. We then talked about embodiment at all, which would imply that the agent is embedded in the environment, or that the agent is embedded in a body which interacts with the environment. So if we're talking about action, we're talking about the body. We have to talk about the body if we're talking about sensory motor learning. So that isn't really in the diagram. And the state, of course, is kind of arbitrary because we can have a lot of states. And quite frankly, when you have sensory motor learning, oftentimes the state is undefined or cryptic, and so it's hard to know even what the state or the reward is. So this is kind of leading to this idea that reinforcement learning faces fundamental challenges. So a few of these are that rewards are inferred, not given. So sometimes rewards are very clear, but a lot of times they're not. So sometimes the reward is sort of divined from the environment. So sometimes there are even things that are acausal. So, if you're worshiping the sun and you think that if you worship the sun enough that it will give you good crops, good crop yields, and you kind of think of that as a reward. So you keep doing that activity, but that isn't really a reward. It's just that you're getting good crop yields independent of your actions. And so the reward isn't really there. It's just kind of imagined or divined from circumstance. Furthermore, the state, understanding the state. What does it mean to have like a good crop yield? What are the underlying conditions of that? There are all sorts of things that kind of mess with this model. So rewards are inferred, not given. Sometimes the rewards are very clear, sometimes they're not. Number 2 is the scalar reward is ill-defined for complex behaviors, as we mentioned. Sometimes the reward is very unclear, depending on the behavior. And then 3, not all active learning is reinforcement learning. So that's why they come out with these different approaches like active inference and HTM and other types of approaches to the brain and behavior. So these issues motivate the need to upgrade or even replace reinforcement learning. So there's this whole, kind of thing where people like to argue that here's the dominant paradigm. Does it need to be replaced, or can you have like variants of that theory? It's a kind of a tactic that oftentimes is sort of rhetorical. In other words, like, we just kind of like do these thought experiments about what would happen if we replaced reinforcement learning with active inference. Well, maybe reinforcement learning is pretty powerful in general, but maybe active inference could inform reinforcement learning. Or we could just get rid of reinforcement learning altogether, but then we would have to kind of get rid of all of the benefits that come with that theory. So that's kind of the point here, is that they're trying to kind of think about how reinforcement learning can be improved, but maybe also replaced, and in the process kind of come up with this theoretical synthesis. So this is where they have this RL debate series where people will defend or criticize their favorite theory. And then, this just kind of talks about some of the ways in which, these conceptual problems with reinforcement learning are manifest. So the first one is rewards must be inferred. They are ultimately subjective. So if you're a neuron in the nervous system, in the brain, there's no such thing as the outside world. All that exists are spikes or action potentials arriving at your synapses from other neurons. Everything else is inferred. So this is where, we have this issue of phenomenology where we have things that are phenomenological and things that are not. Color, for example, is not phenomenological in this case. Photons are. Color is inferred from photons. It's constructed by the brain from incoming sensory data. Rewards are very similar to this. Rewards are inferred from incoming sensory data. And so, that kind of decouples a bit, causality in the environment from perceived causality in the brain. So they kind of point out that this is the first major problem with the Sutton and Bartow view. The environment doesn't dole out rewards. It actually just provides sensory evidence, and then you kind of interpret the reward from that, meaning that the reward can sometimes be, spurious, or it can be weak or cryptic. So they give this example of the burger versus salad. So consider an omnivore and a vegetarian. Put a double cheeseburger with bacon and a salad in front of them. Is there an objective observer independent scale or reward attached to each food? No. The omnivore maybe prefers the burger and the vegetarian prefers the salad. It's just because of their internal preferences that they make those choices. And then, of course, the reward is different for each of those agents. And then so rewards are just kind of this thing that is an internal state more than an external state. And so then they point out that reinforcement learning typically works in toy settings, meaning that it's not really, it's not a real world scenario. It's not a real world case study. It's just kind of like we set up a really obvious reward structure. It's very clear what the reward is, and then we have the algorithm do. We implement the algorithm, and then we get the result that the agent responds to our reward. Well, if the reward is clear, the reward signal is clear, and the agent is simple, then obviously it works. But that's not necessarily the way it works in the real world. So this brings us to a deeper question: is reward maximization really enough? If we do like neuroscience experiments with rats, we often set up the experiment where the rat is put in an environment where they're deprived of things in their environment that they would normally have, and then we give them a juice box or like a lever which they can push to get juice. And so obviously, when they're in that kind of setting, there's this very simple interaction that can be made. It's not, it's not like real life. It kind of tells us that they would like more juice if the juice is good, but that's beyond that. That's not really giving us much more information. So the sort of ecological validity of a lot of reinforcement learning is low, according to their argument. So that means that you can't say a lot about reinforcement learning as something that we can model behavior on from, like, experiments with a rat in a cage or this idealized model of reward. And so and then this other point: not all active learning is reinforcement learning. And so this is a classic experiment by Tolman, where they don't really go through, well, I guess they go through it down here. So they basically, this experiment, Tolman and Hanzik, 1930, trained 3 groups of rats in a maze. You have the rewarded group, which received food at the end of every maze trial. No reward group, which never received a food reward. And a delayed reward group, which explored the maze without reward for 10 days and then received food from day 11 onward. And so then they talk about kind of this, how this set up this idea of latent learning, and how the rats had built an internal cognitive map of the maze without explicit rewards. So they kind of had some findings from this sort of study where rats demonstrated active learning without any well-defined reward from the environment. Continuous external rewards actually interfered with this ability. The delayed group learned more efficiently once a reward appeared. And the delayed group was exploring freely, showing clear evidence for active learning. But importantly, it wasn't reinforcement learning in the Sutton and Bartow sense. So that means that either motivations are intrinsic and not necessarily based on external reward, or that also that reward might not be enough. That reward is there, but other things are active. So we are kind of getting an incomplete picture. And, it's important to remember that behaviorism was, of course, a dominant approach in the early part of the 20th century. But cognitivism came about largely because behaviorism was insufficient in explaining a lot of decision making behaviors. So, we're dealing with a paradigm that was kind of supplanted in 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 psychology, and so we have to kind of remember that, because that gives us kind of a framework for maybe ways to improve reinforcement learning or even supplant reinforcement learning. So yeah, the Sutton and Bartow paradigm is, their idea is that it needs to be improved, or we need to think about it more critically, and that's what they're going to be doing in this series. Okay. So, do we have any comments or questions?
Okay. No, yeah, that's really cool. Elias Dinesh is obviously part of Lisa Feldman-Bear's lab. There's come up with some discussions here, discussions outside of this place too. So it's always fun to see what he's up to. And I've been looking at the website, and I really enjoy this. Like I this is a great example. So timely. Thank you for finding this, Bradley. Like this is, I wish more debates were laid out in advance like this. Yeah. I think that's what we need to do. Like that's as if we arranged it, or was it reward, or was it just the divine insight of our conversations leading us to wherever we are here? But no, that's exactly where I was kind of going with some of the stuff that I wanted to see more of. So this will be a nice example too. And because it's so close, this is actually quite interesting parallel to something that Andres from the Quality Research Institute said when he was looking at the state structure of happiness or discontent, and how I don't know if you're going to try to recapture the specifics of what he was getting at, but he's looking at the qualia and things he was looking at through the research is doing. But as a slight tangent, discontent or massive disharmony often is a similar structure to contentness, with one thing off, right? Or a very small structure change. And so that's why I feel a version of that right now, looking at this this is great stuff. And it's I know, especially, and I realize seeing the final debate set up is oh yeah, and I think it's quite popular right now, and have these debate shows where you go around and you debate the entire planet, and you have I'm trying to stem a very particular rant that I don't know that I want to get into. But yes, so you have these debates, and what the only thing that I'm missing from this, and I'm happy because the website itself kind of gets at it. The website itself is attempting to address it. In the debate synthesis, I was hoping before I saw what we went through, I'm we need to talk about the problem space too. Even if there's disagreements about how we see the problem space, you have to set it, you have to contextualize it, and you have to, I like what they did on the website, and you went through it right now. It was very nice and very helpful and very useful. I want to normalize that. And I hope during the debate at the end, they kind of give some time to both that and then also, their own quote unquote state change from okay, we started having this view, here's where we've kind of ended up with it. And even with a way of what I would like to do, not necessarily in the GitHub version control sense, but map like the ooh, all these words that come to mind, GitHub or embryo, like these are all buzzwords for us, and I don't like what comes to mind, but mapping some of the stems, you know, like we talked about trolley birds and things like this, not just like I just had passing up, but like you're like you're going to the edge, and you okay, ideally maybe you've collectively spent some time, as I'm saying, steel manned the problem space. Like you've made articulations about the space as good as you can be, with a hopefully high degree of consensus, but like at least identify the starting point coherently and care about that, and then maybe you're have some kind of a code shorthand documentation structure. I don't know, like philosophical uh, rigor of some kind about the changes to that problem space that you're advocating for, or at the very least, like I was going to use the word affordances. Also, I feel like I'm using all. I feel like all the buzzwords are just coming out of my mind from our like this lab that we're talking about. But like, are you able to sort of articulate the 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 end the edge where the debate expands into like, oh well, if this is so, it maybe emphasizes this downstream set of things while taking away from the other. And I feel like that just the articulation clearly of what that is relative to who's winning the debate or how can be like like there's a certain kind of humor to the fact that we talk about all this stuff about, you know, debates and winning and like applying this to like logic or rightness or correctness or something, and then yeah, it's like part one of the debate structure itself is like, well, the reward's kind of just inside you anyways, and so it's like,
Yeah.
you know, but like how do you you know, how do you not just the sense of winning, but like how do you articulate what's happening in a way that's not just, well, this resonates with this pangs around inside me in a way that's favorable and positive, so I feel good about that. I think that's a win, and I think I'm advancing something because it resonantly feels enjoyable to me, versus like, you know, and then winning, but then like, and I don't honestly suspect this is going to become some ugly, you know, brutish debate uh, of our reinforcement learning philosophers or anything, but you know, like how do we make it meaningful in ways that maybe can outlast the moment too,
Right.
and keep the map of the space that we've built afterwards. Like, hey, like, is this a map we can reuse later, or is it just, well, that was nice, you know? So I'm very appreciative of you sharing that and walking through it, because it's a great real example about a real topic with real people that are, you know, doing it. Like that's one of the best examples I know right now for the last found it out 20 minutes ago of like what is an example of some of this. So thank you for that.
All right. I think why don't we call it a day. Thank you for attending, and I think we had some good conversations today.
All right, take care, everybody.
Take
Bye.
care. Thanks.